Hi, I'm Ted Haftegabber, founder and producer of Live Talks Los Angeles. Thanks for joining us. Since we started over a decade ago, we have brought you hundreds of conversations with storytellers, writers, actors, musicians, humorists, chefs, and thought leaders in business and science. You can watch and hear most of these in our YouTube channel and our podcast. For details, visit livetalksla.org. And now, here's the show you've tuned in to see.
Thank you for writing this wonderful book. I feel like I went to Iceland in downtown Los Angeles. It would have been much better to go to Iceland. And Iceland has a population, I was thinking, that's probably, there are more people in the immediate area here right around us. Certainly in the LA school district has 650,000 kids.
Yeah, there you go. Twice the population of Iceland, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, welcome, and I hope you've been enjoying it.
Thank you. Absolutely. A little bit nicer weather here than we usually get in Iceland. So I have unusual sunburns from the last day walking around.
You wear it well, and that's an Icelandic designer, just to be really reductive about clothing and women and all of that, but you are wearing, what's the name?
It's a store called Systir og Makar, Sisters and Spouses, with local design. And I try to wear that, but we were talking about this before, I feel like my biggest achievement on this book tour is that I travel carry-on for 11 days. So I think I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, you should be. That's impressive. That's impressive. And I also like that you thrift store shop, which I thought was a very cool fact about you. But this is all stupid women's stuff, girl stuff. And I just wrote a book about how women used to be relegated to the women's beat in journalism. So we can talk a little bit about that and how it works in journalism for women in Iceland in a bit, since that's your profession or one of your professions. But I wanted to start about, Ted mentioned this a little bit more about how you got to Iceland from Canada in the first place via Oxford, thanks to the raffle tickets and your husband. It's a great story, and I'd love for people to hear it.
Sure. And yes, it's my carpe diem story, I suppose you could say. The beginning part of it is like many other love stories or stories of how spouses met their partners, that we were both students at Oxford University in England together, and Canadians were a dime a dozen there. There's a lot of international students, but there's a lot of Canadians, but there was one person from Iceland. And everyone thought that was very exotic. Of course, this is at the end of the last century when it wasn't so much on people's radars as tourists or anything like that. And so he really formulated my entire stereotype of what Icelanders were like. He was very quiet and hardly had anything to drink. And so I thought that's what all Icelanders are like, and it's not entirely true. And so one day there was a fundraiser for the rowing crew. We all rowed because we thought that was a very Oxford thing to do. We weren't very good at it. And the men had these styrofoam cups that they marked with their names, and the women, it sounds so old-fashioned when I say it, so the women would buy these tickets for £1, and we'd get 5 tickets and write our names on them. And you'd put them in different cups, and then the guys would draw one name out and have to take that person out on a date. And I remember being at the party. I remember I had a £2 coin, and I thought, what the heck? I'll get 10 tickets. And then I thought, this is my moment really to give fate a little push. So I put almost all the tickets in Goodney's cup. Because I didn't want to put all of them in, because then I thought I'd be like some kind of a stalker. But I put almost all of them in because I thought you can't leave these important things up to fate. Little did I know. So he inevitably drew my name, and he took me out for a very nice dinner. And again, I thought, does he like me, or are Icelanders just like this? And that was the beginning of a beautiful love story.
And it crossed neither of your minds that one day he would run for, you were studying history, as was he, right? He was an older gentleman.
Yes, 8 years older, which seemed massively older at the time. He was 30 and I was 22, and I didn't even know that people who were as old as 30 could like go to a party and go to a fundraiser, but as it turns out they can.
Fossils,
yes,
fossils.
Indeed.
They're probably better at seducing young women. And so that love occurred, and fast forward, and there you are in Iceland, because for family reasons he wanted to go back home.
That's right.
And I don't know, did you have any idea when you went to Oxford what would happen to you if you hadn't met him?
No, I thought, it was only a one-year program, and I went because I wanted to live abroad and try being in a different country. And I think I thought I would maybe try to work there. It's a little bit easier for Canadians sometimes to work in the UK later. But beyond that, I didn't really know. And then he was always going to be in the UK to finish his PhD, but he has a daughter from his first marriage. And so we also knew that when he was finished, he was going to go back and live in Iceland. And in a sense, the positive thing about that was that we didn't have to kind of weigh the pros and cons about, do we want to stay in England? Do we want to move to Canada? If we wanted to be together, we were going to be together in Iceland.
At that point, did you think of yourself as a feminist, or did you, you proposed before you went back, so was that a feminist act, or was that just a...
No, that's just
putting
again,
your
he's
hooks
a
in?
slow mover, so you gotta... No, I've always thought of myself as a feminist since I ever had heard the word, but I think, proposing to him was more because I think in Iceland, and I talk about this in the book, being married isn't really a thing. It's not really important. Couples who are together may or may not be married, and nobody really knows either way. Nobody changes their name if they're married, so there isn't really anything that distinguishes unmarried and married couples. But I had thought, okay, I'm moving to Iceland. I'm not moving to see how it goes. I'm going to be here at least, in the medium term, and if I'm going to make that commitment, then I think eventually I would like to get married, so I might as well make that commitment now. So once I thought that, I've never really been a fan of this idea of thinking if you want to get married, you talk about it a whole lot, and then you decide when you'll officially get engaged. Then I thought, well, then you might as well be engaged if you're talking about when we get married. So I thought, well, if he hasn't brought it up before I bring it up, then I'll just do that. He got to propose to someone first with his first wife, so I never had before. So it all worked out all right. But after we went away for a weekend, and I proposed to him, and he said yes. And then we were driving back, and he called his mom in Iceland and said, we got engaged. And she said, I hope you did it properly. And he said, yes. And then he didn't tell her the truth for many, many weeks.
Did it help her affection for you, or hinder it that you had posed the question? I'm curious.
I think neither. I think naturally, I think she just assumed that he had been the one who'd proposed, but I think she didn't really care afterwards. She just thought it was funny too.
And what did your parents think about your moving? Forget about getting engaged, but moving.
Well, I think the dating the 8 years older divorced Icelander was kind of the harder thing to get over. And then after they met him, they thought he was great, as I knew they would. So then they were very happy.
But so there you are in Iceland, making your way. And that wasn't just the way you depict it in the book. It wasn't a piece of cake. You didn't just waltz into Iceland and everybody embraced you. There was a strange learning curve, including, of course, the language. Forget about the work part. But how did you navigate that and get people to warm up to you? And again, your husband at this point it's not even a concept to him that he's going to run for public office, nor would it be for you.
When we first moved there, he was on a very poorly paid postdoc research grant at the university, researching the cod wars, about fishing disputes and fishing limits. It's very lucrative, if you know. So he was doing that work, and I was lucky at the beginning because I got a job right away working in marketing, but then I got laid off 1 year later, and that was much harder. And I tried to start learning the language Icelandic as quickly as I could, because even though pretty much everybody speaks excellent English and you can easily live in the country without speaking any Icelandic, I really, because I knew I was going to be there in the long term, I knew that I wanted to invest the time, and I thought it's such an easy thing to postpone. You know, you're going through so many changes, it's so easy to say, okay, I'll wait until I get a job and then I'll start. Now I'll wait till it's after winter and it's brighter. And all of a sudden you'll be there for 20 years and never have started. So I was very fortunate that I started, you know, the week after I moved to take lessons and try to speak it as much as I could.
Was it hard for you? I mean, is it a hard? It looks like a hard language.
I think it's a hard language by European standards. You know, I mean, the alphabet kind of looks the same. The grammar is complicated, and I think like learning any other language, you just have to be very flexible to make a lot of mistakes. And fortunately, I made all of those mistakes before I was a public figure, or I made the worst of the mistakes before I was a public figure, I should say. So I think that you know, that helped a little bit.
Is it like a lot of countries where even if you do make mistakes, people are so honored and impressed that you're even bothering to try that they cut you slack? Or
yes, I would say so. And then the only challenge, though, as well, is that there wasn't a long history of immigration. It's increased since then, and so people actually aren't used to hearing imperfect Icelandic. You know, because usually people who can speak it well speak it perfectly. And so it's harder in some senses. People have to really get used to understand it spoken with an accent. And I think they do, but you know, some people claim they don't understand what you're saying when, I mean, the nuances, I feel like it sounds the same, it just has a tiny accent.
How long was it before you felt like you had facility with the language to have conversations with people? And when did you really start feeling Icelandic? Was it, I would think it would be well before you became First Lady.
Oh yeah, I mean, it goes in fits and starts learning a language. So you know, you start with all the basics and the basic grammar, and maybe you order in a restaurant or something like that. And then it depends on what you're doing. So when I got pregnant when I was pregnant, expecting my first child in 2007, then you learn all these words associated with childbirth and with going to the doctors. And then you have children, and then they go to preschool. I remember then I learned the words for snot and dinosaur. And you know, these are actually words that you use all the time if you have preschoolers, but you never use if you don't have preschoolers. So and then, you know, my husband ran for president. You learn words like referendum and campaign and all these other terms that maybe I didn't know. So kind of, it goes in fits and starts. But I was fortunate that I got citizenship in 2008. And I tried to get it as quickly as I could because I wanted to be able to vote. I thought that was very important. And I sort of have always called myself Icelandic since then.
And is the Icelandic process of citizenship, it requires the language, or?
It does now, but it didn't when I got it.
Wow.
So you have to now you have to have a language test, but you didn't need to when I applied for it.
Is it like naturalized American citizens where you know more about the history than?
No, just the language test is required. So, but I mean, I've tried to learn a lot about the history, and being married to a historian is helpful in that respect. Yes.
Yes, it would be, I would think. Especially, and you know everything about cod, I would assume.
I do, yeah. I mean, I could talk to you for a long time about Icelandic grammar, and I could talk to you a long time about fishing disputes, but I feel like that might not be so valuable for our dear people here.
Yes, perhaps not. Maybe we'll see if everybody
Yeah,
wants.
people can ask a question. I mean, go nuts.
Pivot, yeah, for sure. So when did you start realizing that things were better? I mean, you're from Canada originally. When did you start realizing that things were better for women in Iceland? When did it hit you? I mean, I guess the childbearing part of things.
Yeah,
life?
I mean, and also, I lived in England for 5 years in between those two, and I would say England was much more old-fashioned the way I experienced towards women. So it was the first place that I was working for a company, and there, you know, all those stereotypical things, but assuming that you were getting the tea you know, after I proposed to Goodney, I had quit my job because we were going to be moving to Iceland, and I planned a 4-month backpacking trip, solo backpacking trip through Central Asia and Southeast Asia. And Goodney was finishing his doctorate, so he was just going straight to Iceland. And when I went back to work the next day, the people at the office said, so you got engaged. Did you get down on one knee? And I said, no, I didn't. What does the ring look like? And I said, there isn't a ring. And then they said, and I guess you're canceling your trip. And I was like, why on earth would I cancel my trip? Because I got engaged.
I planned my trip and I
I'm going on the damn trip. Anyway, so I think I found Britain more old-fashioned in some senses. In Iceland, and I tell this story in my book at the beginning, a moment that sticks in my mind from my first year before kids were on my radar was that the chair of the board of this company where I was working, which was a really small software startup, was a woman, and she was chairing the meeting nursing her baby after work. And it was, I think, mostly men or all men on the board, and nobody cared. You know, nobody was like making a joke or looking away or anything. It was just completely natural. And that really stuck in my mind, of course. And then, as you said, when I was pregnant and we had 4 children at 2-year intervals, well, first of all, I never would have had 4 children, I think, if I had lived in Canada, because we couldn't have afforded it. Right. But the process there, you know, we had excellent parental leave, and my husband also took several months of parental leave, and then the childcare is very subsidized as well, especially if you have siblings. So if you move to Iceland, you're having kids, have them close together, it's cheaper. And so that, you know, that absolutely helped. It just showed that people were waiting for me to get back in the workforce, as you will.
So can you explain a little bit more, because I found that really fascinating, and it's exactly the reason why I never did have children in this country. It's that this child minding, this whole ethos of we want to support you, not just go figure it out yourself.
And I think, you know, there's almost an old-fashioned side of that too. This "it takes a village" idea that children, it's a very family-friendly society. People love children to the degree that, you know, the pendulum swings. I think that if someone chooses not to have children, people think of that as a little bit strange, you know. And people ask, you know, as soon as I'd moved to Iceland and you know, especially once I got married, because people thought, oh, she's foreign, she'll want to get married before she has kids. And then, you know, we weren't having kids right away. And then and my husband had a daughter from his first marriage, so they knew everything worked with him. So it was clearly my fault if we're not. And people would just ask me all the time, you know, why haven't you had kids yet? When are you having kids? Why don't you want kids? Are you scared to have kids? And it kind of makes you just say, all right, I'm not doing this just to spite all of you, you know. But you know, so the pendulum swings a bit that way. But the idea is that it should be so easy, that the society is kind of built around supporting that it's a normal thing if people do want to have a family, and therefore the rest of their lives shouldn't be penalized, either financially or just the way in which they live their lives. So it's not uncommon for a university student to have a child, for instance, and then if your essay is late because your child got the chicken pox and you had to look after it, that's a reasonable excuse to miss an essay because your kids get sick. That happens. And so, you know, absolutely, I hadn't really ever thought of having that many children, but it was just so easy, and they were so great once I had them.
and really, this whole idea of child minding, it really is an assigned. Can you explain that more?
Yeah. So from the age of 2, it kind of depends on the municipalities. There's the preschools, which is 2 to the 1st grade when the compulsory schooling starts. And most kids do go to that at some. They might not all start at the age of 2, but almost all of them are there by the age of 4 or 5. And they're very well monitored system, and they're called play schools because the emphasis is on play and interaction, not necessarily learning to read, you know, by a certain age or those skills, but just how you're interacting with each other. And the kids generally really like it very much. And then this child minding, as I was saying, it fits in really the period between when parental leave expires and when the daycare starts. And it depends on the municipality where you live, because some will take you early or not. But these are people who are licensed and accredited and look after up to a maximum of 5 toddlers in their home and give them food and take them out and do all of this. And so we had I feel like she was one of the most popular childminders in our neighborhood, and I was always pregnant with the next baby when I had one there, so I could book her, you know, really well in advance. Another good reason to be efficient. And they were just lovely, you know, and she was from Colombia and spoke Spanish to the kids, so they learned little words of Spanish before they learned words of English. We didn't know what they were saying. And no, they were really wonderful, and it was a nice experience. So then, you know, I went back to work right away, as did my husband. So when my 4th child and my first daughter was born, my oldest was in the 1st grade then, And he finished school at around 2 in the afternoon. They finished early there, and then went to an after-school program till 4:30. And then we had 2 who were in the play school full-time. And even though I was on maternity leave and then my husband was on paternity leave, you would never bring the kids, say, out of preschool because a parent was at home with the child. You would leave them to do all that. It's not expensive. And that was great because then I was focusing on one child all day, but I had the confidence of having had 3 other children. Mm-hmm. So I was a lot more easygoing with that one than my first.
And school is paid for up through university.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so every aspect of society, and healthcare is free.
Yeah, I mean, there's user fees, which I mention as a Canadian because I wasn't used to paying $10 to go in and see a doctor. But when you're having children, that's all free. And if you're a senior citizen or you're a child, everything is free for that. But if you have to go for a regular procedure or something like that, then you pay $5 or $10 or something.
And the elephant, of course, in every room in the United States right now is, I'm sure you've heard, I think you were in the country when this happened, this leak about the Supreme Court. Yeah, and Roe v. Wade. And in Iceland, I read, it has been legal abortion since 1975, I think it is.
I'm sure at least, yeah. I mean, I don't even know because it's just not something that people talk about. But they've just lowered, they did modernize the abortion rules, I think it was last year or the year before, so that they lowered the age so that you can be 15 without needing parental consent to have an abortion. And I feel like I ought not to say it because I might be misquoted, but I think you used to need to have a second doctor's permission if you were terminating a pregnancy, after 24 weeks or before or something, and then that's been gotten rid of now too.
What about access to birth control? Is it easy?
I don't know myself, but you, of course, as you can see. But yes, it's not a taboo subject, so it's something that kids are taught about in school all the time, and very easy to go and get access to.
And as you write, sex is not taboo either, right?
No, and it's an interesting, so I wrote this chapter called Stigma-Free Sexuality. Really, I called it that for the alliterative effect of the name in the book. But and I kind of surprised. It was one of many things that surprised me when I was writing it because I didn't think that I was going to write about something like that. But then when I was thinking about gender equality and different aspects of society, I thought that, of course, that's an important dimension of working towards gender equality, this idea of double standards that exist for men or for women, and these ideas of marriage, single parenthood, all of that. So I did end up sort of delving into that. But for me as an immigrant, that's probably the area that I have personally found the most challenging to adapt to, in a sense. I think for me personally, the approaches I think are great, and I'm just used to it. And then I think, okay, when my kids are 17 and they want to stay over at their boyfriends or girlfriends, will I find this okay? I don't know.
Right, because that was probably not
Makes
how
me a little nervous
for
yeah.
you.
Oh,
yeah.
No. Yeah.
So all of this is background to explain how you inculcated yourself into this new world, and then all of a sudden, and you get into it in the book, we don't have to talk about it here unless people want to, all of a sudden you find yourself in what you called the job as human handbag, First Lady, and you were very vocal when you first elevated to that status. As you point out, it's not like in this country where it's an official role with a staff, et cetera. It was a weird, I think that was the headline, you wrote a Times essay, New York Times essay. It was, I'm sure it wasn't your headline.
Them,
Incredibly weird job of being a First Lady.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about that, how you went from private citizen Eliza with the weirdness of having managed your way in this new fabulous world to oh my God, what's going on? Everybody's telling me my dress is the wrong color.
I know, tell me about it. And as you saw in the book, that did happen. Yes. It's kind of a thread that I weave really throughout the book, and I won't go into the whole story here if you want it, but it's suffice to say as well that my husband did not have political ambitions, and we went from him being a history professor at the beginning of April 2016 to being elected head of state at the end of June 2016. So it really was absolutely that fast of a process. And so we were thrust into the national spotlight all of a sudden. And as you said, there is no job description for being the spouse of a head of state, but there are certain expectations. Right. And all of a sudden, you are also known primarily in relation to someone else. So, you know, I'd built up this career for myself there and was doing well, and then all of a sudden I'm Goodney's wife. And that, of course, I'm very proud to be Goodney's wife, but that's a very strange feeling for one's own identity all of a sudden.
But you weren't in that position before, because a lot of women are, even when their husbands aren't first ladies, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, aren't president.
Absolutely. And I think that piece that I wrote in the New York Times really struck that chord, that a lot of people are used to, you know, being known primarily in relation to their spouse for whatever reason, without wanting to, you know, diminish. It's such an honor and a privilege to be able to serve as First Lady. But I think because it's also this role of you know, the wife, quote unquote, there are these kind of old-fashioned expectations sometimes. You know, I had no idea what I was doing, obviously, and I was getting all kinds of advice, and people would say, well, oh, you should go to the store and buy this, that'll be great to wear as your outfit to drop the kids off at preschool in the mornings. I thought, do I need an outfit to take the kids to, can I just, you know, be in my pajamas? Like, I know. And you know, or when you go on a state visit and it's the winter and you have to make sure that you have gloves that match your handbag, and even though you don't wear the gloves, and you have to have different handbags to match the different outfits, and it confused me a lot. And I also felt it kind of reduced me, as you said, to this visual prop for somebody else. You know, I wasn't delivering any speeches, I wasn't doing remarks. And then I thought, well, I think it was especially after that first state visit when I just kind of accompanied my husband, and I thought, well, it's even the taxpayers paid for my flight over. Although I guess nothing else since I'm a volunteer in my job. But, you know, that's not really a good use of the taxpayers' money in a sense. Mm-hmm. So then I tried to do more, tried to deliver speeches, and slowly but surely realized that not having a handbook on how to do this shouldn't make me nervous. I should see it as an opportunity. But it was kind of an evolution to reach that point. And I think in Iceland, you know, people are ready to hear that. I think people think that that's a good thing, that I'm outspoken.
And that, yeah, the guest's eyes see more clearly, mm-hmm. I think, is what you say, or you say in the book, you quote in the book. And so the idea that you're able to see and reflect back the role of women in mm-hmm. this society where women are already with a leg up. That's a bad pun, sorry. Whoa. But women already have an advantage, mm-hmm. or at least somewhat of an advantage. It's not a perfect place for women, as you point out in the book. It's mm-hmm. not, you know, nirvana, but it is a better place than it is certainly in bigger places or places like this country.
Well, I think the nuance there is that I really feel that we've passed the tipping point as to whether trying to work towards gender equality is an important objective, but how we're going to get there. And we've realized that gender equality is something that benefits people of all genders. It is not a zero-sum game that promotes one group at the expense of another group. Everybody benefits. And so so I think that then once you reach that point, then you can focus your energies on really narrowing down the areas where we can improve. And there's plenty of areas in Iceland where we can improve. And we also realize how much we need to remain vigilant. You know, it's not going to happen by its own accord. It's not going to, you know, even if we look at, say, representation on the boards of companies, it wasn't until they introduced a quota, people said, oh, there's lots of qualified women and it'll just happen because there's so many people. It doesn't just happen unless you really think about it. And then they introduced quotas, and
40%, right? It is
at least 40, yeah, 60-40, or basically should be 50-50 in theory on larger company boards. And nobody would talk about removing that now. But I bet if you removed it, it would go back down again, even though there's plenty of qualified women. So I think it's just a matter in those situations of using those tools as reminders for us that that it's easy to forget about things, because we've all been socialized in these different ways of silencing women, of not listening to women's voices. And I mean, not just women, but lots of underrepresented groups, of not taking people seriously, of putting them into certain categories without knowing them. You know, there's all these studies, if you walk into a classroom and say to school kids, draw a picture of an astronaut or a president or doctor, they all draw pictures of men. And it's those kind of things that we need to work to shift somehow in the perception. And what I'm hopefully trying to do in the book, you know, I do talk about policies because those are of course important, but what I'm really trying to do is inspire people on an individual level to see the world with that sort of equitability eye and work to elevate others as well.
Which is why what's so interesting about the book, and I'm not dwelling on it because I hope everyone will buy it and read it, is that you've chosen 40 or so women, very representative, including people of color. And I did not realize, what is the percentage of people who are outsiders, much less people of color?
Right, so there are more people of foreign origin living in Iceland than there are senior citizens. So it's a big change, and it's something, because I'm one of those people, that I like to mention a lot when I'm speaking, because the country is far less homogeneous than people might think it is. And that has been a very rapid change. So that, you know, 25 years ago, 1% of the population was foreign-born. Now it's 15.5%. In the US, that's 10%. Now, the US, obviously, there's people who are, you know, second, third generation, whereas in Iceland, if you're not one of those new people, you're probably 1,000 years back. But nevertheless, it is a much more diverse population, I think people think. Now, people of color make up a very small percentage of that because the largest group come from Europe, primarily Poland. There's over 5% of the people of Iceland are from Poland originally. So, you know, but it does bring about its interesting opportunities and challenges. And it's something that I probably am going way off the topic necessarily of gender equality here, but for me as an immigrant First Lady as well, it's something that I try to do a lot because I think it's important for people in Iceland to hear me speak the language imperfectly, to hear me make mistakes, to remind them that I am an immigrant, but that doesn't mean that I can only talk about immigrant issues or that I don't have something worthy of note to say. And so I try to spend a lot of time within the country talking about that. So you're right, in the book, I think there are 5 women overall, or Sprakkar as I call them, which means outstanding women. And they come, there's one woman originally from Palestine who started her own business. She is in my chapter on corporate Iceland. And there's a student leader who is from El Salvador, who became the first woman of foreign origin elected to run the student council at the University of Iceland. And then there's a whole chapter on immigration. And again, I tried to point out that you can't put all immigrants in some cookie cutter box. You know, we all have different backgrounds and experiences, but there are challenges for immigrant women that locally born women don't have. And so I tried to examine some of those, whether that's racism, whether that's living in an isolated or different environment. And I also profiled this woman from England who was in an abusive relationship and spent time at the women's shelter. And she had this interesting point. It kind of surprised me because I thought she would say something like, well, Iceland at least is so works so much to promote gender equality that you know, this was the situation was dealt with very well. But she actually said that in her experience, equality kind of worked against her, because the default in custody disputes is joint custody unless you can go to court and prove the abuse against the father, which of course is very, very difficult to do.
Right.
So that was an interesting point that she made.
Yeah, no, that was sad to read.
Yeah.
Sad to read. But I like your book because it is very honest about the perils of society in general. It doesn't paint this, it is a wonderful place, and it is routinely ranked. I think another reason Ted wanted me to talk with you is because I lived in Bhutan, which is also a very poor version of Iceland in the sense that it's seen as a very happy place, but has just as many issues that you address here.
We're the third happiest now, but the Finns are the happiest. So I don't, you know, there's good for the Finns.
Maybe next year it'll come back.
Yeah, but you know, I think in the Nordics we tend to top a lot of countries, so it's fair to even it out. But we're also the world's most peaceful country, and one of the most longest living. So I feel like these things may be connected somehow.
When you talk to your friends from your youth and from your days at Oxford, Do you get a sense from about the challenges that women are facing in other places? What do you think about having left Canada? We, of course, many of us idealize Canada as a wonderful healthcare and open society. So where do you find your place in the world now that you identify as an Icelander?
I mean, I identify as both, then I get to wear both hats. And it's very good because our sporting teams rarely compete against each other, so
so you can play both.
So it's never been down to the wire in terms of who I support. You know, the two differences that I see with Canada, which is I guess the other country that I know the best, are to do with affordable childcare, which hasn't yet been introduced in Canada, and representation in Parliament, because Iceland has 47.5% women in Parliament, and Canada has 30-something%. And in Canada, there's an issue of women being elected and then not continuing. So whether it's because they choose not to run again or they don't get reelected, and there's various reasons for that. Maybe similar here, but we know that women in public office, they are subject to a lot more attacks. They are subject to a lot more vitriol, and if you are serving in Parliament, or I'm sure in Congress, and you're trying to go back to your constituency, and it's not a family-friendly setup either. In Iceland, we have this list system for parties. So rather than vote for one person, you vote for a party. And if your party gets 40% of the vote, you get 40% of the seats overall. So within the parties, they've kind of decided at the top parts of the seats to have gender balance, which makes it much easier to get even gender parity overall.
And gender equality is legislated in the sense that it's taught in schools. It's not even at the level. Is that
Maybe,
correct?
Yeah,
what I read?
It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
I mean, officially, not.
Yeah. I mean, it's just something. I mean, it's certainly a goal of the current government. The Prime Minister is also the Minister of Equality. Gender equality fits under that department too.
So it's so interesting to me how your life has become about being an emissary for Iceland in your work, even before you were First Lady. That's really what you were doing with the magazine, the Writers' Conference that you host. Do you think about that sometimes, how you wake up in the middle of the night and think, here I am, how'd this happen?
Nutty. Yeah, I do wake up in the middle of the night and think that and feel incredibly, thankful and grateful. I just feel like the luckiest person ever. And it's just so much fun, though. But I say often, because I wasn't born Icelandic by some genetic twist of fate, but I had to choose to move there and choose to have my family there and make it my home, that it entitles me to brag a little bit more. And there's a stereotype, too, about Icelanders that they're very modest. They don't like to brag. And so I'm like, I'm from Canada. I can brag. It's no problem. So I think it's really fun. And as I use that phrase in the book, and there's all these Icelandic idioms, I hope that the book is kind of my love letter to Iceland, in a sense, a portrait of a country using the theme of gender equality. But I hope that readers learn a whole lot about the country overall anyway. And it is this idea because they're seeing it with my outsider's eyes. So there's maybe things that I saw, like the woman breastfeeding her baby in the meeting. I don't think anybody who was maybe born and raised in Iceland would ever take note of that, because it's so commonplace that you wouldn't think to remark on it.
Now that there is a larger immigrant population, how do you think that's going to change the sort of baseline ethos of the place? Or
I think that's great. I mean, I'm biased because I'm an immigrant, but I think immigrants are adding, incredible diversity, fantastic food, a great range of education and experience. We know that immigrants overall are generally better educated than the population that they come into. So as long as we as a society provide them the tools to really reach their potential, such as making it easier to learn Icelandic, such as reducing prejudice, then I think it's just going to make our country a better place.
And so has your book, and have you been well received by the locals, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, I'm asked a lot how it was when my husband was running for president, and I think the fact that I spoke Icelandic was very helpful. I think if we were, I went with him campaigning everywhere. I think if I couldn't speak Icelandic on the campaign trail, that would have been detrimental for him. But the former First Lady is Israeli originally.
Yeah.
So she, and she was very popular and very well liked as well. And so she kind of, broke the mold a little bit, and people were used to that. So, that was absolutely very, very helpful for me as well. And again, I think people are happy that I've written the book, but I don't really look in the comment section, so I don't know. But it's another plus side about not having Icelandic as my first language, is that I read Icelandic slower, and if there's a word that comes up that I think sounds bad, I'm not going to put it in Google Translate. So I kind of live in this little bubble, that I see what I live in my own echo chamber of praise. I don't know, but I hope so. And I don't know. This is how I try to live my life, with trusting my own integrity. I thought, I'm so privileged to have this opportunity to speak now, to have this platform when maybe it's more likely that people will listen to me. And I hope that I'm saying something of worth that is interesting. So that's what I'm going to do, regardless of what other people say.
Did other women lasso up this idea the way you're doing here and in your speeches, in the sense of talking about praising Iceland for its progressiveness, its policies toward women, openness toward women? Or did it take you coming in to say, hey, you guys, look at this? I mean, Iceland, overall, I would say, I think the difference is that within Iceland, it's one of the things that Icelanders are proud of. We had the first female president in the world. People know that we topped the World Economic Forum's Gender Equality Index. It's something that people know, but I think people don't realize that not everybody knows that. Because they're so used to it.
Right, and there's if I said, not that many people abroad know that we had the first female president, and people say, oh, they don't? They don't know that? And I said, no, they don't. So that's what I kind of wanted to share a little bit more, because I thought, I don't know, I think that I mean, I didn't write this as a marketing book in any sense, but I mean, I think that as a societal value, prioritizing gender equality is a good value to have. So we might as well talk about it a little bit more, and if we can serve as inspiration to other countries, that's great.
Would you ever run for office? Can you?
I keep getting asked this now. It's so strange. It's a
logical question.
I have no, if there's anything that I've learned, it's never to say never, but I'm definitely also not saying yes, that is my next plan to do that, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. But I'm enjoying very much what I'm doing right now.
Will your husband what's the...
There's no term limits.
So he could keep going.
He could keep going. He won't keep going, no. There's no term limits. The previous president was president for 20 years. My husband has said publicly that he would never run for more than 3 terms. So we're midway through, he's midway through the second term now.
And do you think your kids will stay for school in Iceland, or you think they'll...
Gosh, I don't know. Well, my daughter wants to move to LA and live on the beach and get a puppy. She told me this as soon as she's 18. And I said, what about university? Yeah, she'll do that too. But the priority is the beach and LA. She's never been here. And then I have 2 boys that are going to be in the NBA, naturally. But I think that can be done from LA, right? So, and then my other son wants to travel the world, basically. So we'll see what happens.
So the Iceland Writers Conference might soon become the LA Writers Conference.
Maybe. Well, my co-founder, Erica Green, is here from LA, and so we could.
Anything could happen.
Anything could happen. Yeah.
I think that Ted is ready for questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So just a quick reminder about questions. They typically start with a W or an H, sometimes a D. They're generally short, and there is no such thing as a 2-part question. Who would like to go first?
I like these rules. No such thing as a 2-part.
Thank you. I am so excited to read your book. This just sounds wonderful. I'm curious about the gender equality when it was starting in the country. Was there pushback? Like, I want to learn how we can, in our country, learn from you. So can you talk on that?
Was there pushback? It's not, it wasn't like one day they woke up and made a law and said, this is what we're going to do. It was evolution over a long period of time. and a lot of very concerted hard work. I think one of the earlier moments that is sort of cited as a watershed moment was in 1975 when the women went on strike or took a day off, and 90% of the country's women stopped working or didn't work for the day, and the country shut down. And that movement was organized by a group called the Red Stocking Movement, who were actually inspired by an American group of the same name. And then having Vigdis as president, I think, can't be underestimated in terms of the impact that it had on people, seeing the highest office in the land being occupied for 16 years by a woman. And the joke was that kids would grow up and boys would say, "Oh, I would like to be president, but can boys be presidents?" I don't know. But we haven't had a woman president since then, and we didn't have our first female prime minister until 2009. And it's not going to happen unless we continuously keep pushing to make it happen. And I think on a personal note, one of the ideas that I sometimes struggle with is that I come from such a place of privilege personally. And so I feel sometimes like if there is something that has affected me personally that I want to speak up about, that whatever it is such a relatively insignificant thing that I feel like I ought not to say anything. Because I think, okay, I have it really, really good. Why am I complaining about this? Or even if this thing happened once, does it really matter? But I think, I in the context of being, say, a First Lady, I called it the culling of your identity by 1,000 paper cuts, that eventually, if nobody ever talks about anything, nothing ever gets changed. So if we can do it perhaps with humor or acknowledging the fact that the place from where we're saying it, I think that it's still all right. And a tiny example I'm thinking of was took place in the fall after this book had gone to print, when the Prince of Denmark came to visit to Iceland and had dinner at Bessestad, the presidential residence that we hosted. And the cover of the newspaper the next morning had this big photo, and the photo happened to be of when the prince was shaking my hand when he came in, and then my husband is standing there. And the photo caption says, essentially, the president of Iceland had the Prince of Denmark to dinner last night, and the Prince of Denmark is accompanied by Denmark's foreign minister, a man who was not in the photo. And that was the whole photo caption. And so I'm nowhere in the photo caption, even though in the image, I'm the main person in the image shaking the hands of the person that's the guest. And again, in the grand scheme of things, this is not, and it certainly was not an intentional slight that some editor said, ha, we're not going to mention her, I don't want to talk about her. It was just that we forget women all the time. And so I spoke out about it with that idea, because I thought, if we don't, this kind of thing happens all the time. And that editor wrote me a very nice letter of apology and probably won't do that again. So maybe there's one tiny, tiny little step. But I hope that there's little stories like this, because I think these are the tiny things that we can be doing all the time in all of our lives.
Media representation is huge.
It's a huge thing, yeah.
Yeah, whether it's you or any woman.
Right.
Yeah.
And just listening to, all the stories about it being in conversations where, a woman says an idea and then a man says the same thing and he's get credit for the idea. Just that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Hello, a very interesting chat. Madam, if you were to be asked what female person in politics impressed you most at the moment, would AOC be anywhere near the top of that list?
Oh gosh, that's a very specific question. The short answer is I don't know enough about her whole story to know specifically. I think that I like seeing greater representation in political bodies, I would say. I think it's great that there's people of, and I'm thinking not just of backgrounds, but of ages as well. In Iceland, we have a lot of younger members of parliament, and I think it adds this you know, a sort of an enthusiasm and an interest that counterpoints well with people who have a lot of experience, which is also very important. So, you know, I think that I would say that the sort of diversity, just in terms of all kinds of experiences and everything, is always going to be helpful. But I don't know enough of, you know, don't follow the specific politics enough, I'm afraid.
You're just enough younger than me that you might not remember, but I'm sure there are people here who remember when Hilary Rodham Clinton baked cookies, had to bake cookies. She had to actually put Clinton in her name. She was just Hilary Rodham when she first came on the scene with Bill and he was running, and she had to bake cookies in order to show that she was a real woman.
Yeah,
and
it's
that's
interesting.
shocking.
I mean, I love baking cookies. It's one strange. I'm the worst stereotypical sort of housewife in that I don't know how to, you know, I can't sew and I'm not good at, say, flower arranging or anything, but I'm a really good baker. But I like doing it. I don't know. I didn't feel pressure to have to do it, at least.
Yes, that's the big difference.
That's the big difference.
Very
exactly.
big difference.
And I certainly didn't change my name.
But Hilary blurbed your book.
Hilary blurbed my book. It's true.
Working my way to the other side. We have an email question that came in that says, please ask her about, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Thingvellir?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Thingvellir? Is there, what about it? Is that that's the whole question?
I looked it up. Describe it. It's a very interesting
It's a
place.
site. It's a UNESCO-listed World Heritage Site just outside of Reykjavik. It is UNESCO listed for two reasons. One is geological or nature. It's the site where the tectonic plates are separating. The North American and the European tectonic plates are separating at a rate of about 1 centimeter a year. And you can visually see it because there's a lot of sort of chasms and gorges. So it's very beautiful. And secondly, it's also the site of Iceland's first parliament, which is arguably the oldest parliament in the world. Although being married to a historian, he would quibble on some of the definitions of when there's a parliament because there was years when it wasn't that democratic, et cetera, et cetera. So the tourist brochures will tell you it's the world's oldest parliament, but my historian husband will quibble tinily, but yes.
Well, he is the president. So.
I know, it's true.
If gender equality is so ingrained and so early established, why do you say you need to continue to work at it and people forget women? That seems...
That's a good question.
That's a fair question. That's a good question, yeah. Because I think that it's ingrained in the sense that, say, it's there's a office for gender equality in the parliamentarian's office, but I don't know, it's certainly not ingrained, that every parent is teaching their child that as a core value from a young age. And I think that there's so much, within society that we don't think about in that sense, that, gosh, like the example of the photo caption or not, my husband was just telling me how he was at a football tournament on the weekend, and some organizers did a little video interviewing the kids afterwards, and it was a boys and girls tournament, and he said of all the kids they only interviewed 2 girls or something in the video, and he even noticed that. And those are tiny little things that all add up, and that's why we have to remember it, because it's very easy to forget it.
We have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, thank you for coming. I listen to NPR and I hear how Justin Bieber saved the Icelandic economy, and I had to look it up. Since 2019, the Hunger Games and filmed there, and what's the role of women promoting Iceland as a good place to be or live or tourism?
Tourism is really important to Iceland's economy. It's the biggest contributor to the country's GDP, ahead of fisheries. Also,
even ahead of
I'm
fisheries.
I'm going to tie it into Cod Wars in some way. It took over from fisheries in, I think, about 2015. So tourism is really important to the country. That's actually a real area of interest of mine as well. I'm a United Nations Special Ambassador for sustainable tourism. And to me, it kind of links to gender equality, globally, because so many women work in the service industry and the tourist industry. But I think if you're talking Iceland specifically, a lot of people maybe want to come to Iceland because it's safe and it's easy to travel around, but it's beautiful, there are natural attractions. But a dimension of sustainability is more than just the nature. It's more than, say, climbing up a glacier. It's visiting Reykjavik, which is a UNESCO city of literature. It's learning about the culture and the history of a place, and in some senses the societal values, so that that when you go to stay in a hotel, that the people who work there are getting paid a fair wage and they're getting paid sick leave, and I think gender equality kind of plays into that as well.
And our final question for the evening.
Hi, thanks for coming and for standing up for us women. I'm actually building an application that gamifies saving the world that targets all 17 of the UN sustainability goals. And I was wondering, you mentioned that you're a part of the UN as well. Can you tell me a little bit about what Iceland may be doing to help with environmental conservation and saving the environment?
That's another huge priority. So with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the government of Iceland has identified 3 that are the priority areas for them. One is gender equality. Now I'm gonna get them wrong. One is life at sea and land, and then the environment. There's another one that's the environment that's very important, because again, we, for instance, see the effects of global warming right away because we have glaciers that are disappearing. So environmental protection is really important in Iceland, and the government has set a target to have, and when I say the government, it's not my husband's political policy, it's totally separate. So I'm not spouting a campaign, promise to you or not, but to be carbon neutral by 2040. So there's a lot, for example, there's a lot of electric cars in the country. That almost 99% of the homes are heated with renewable energy. And we do have a lot of resources like plentiful water and geothermal hydropower that also help for green energy. So that's a big area of focus. And there's a cool company it's called CarbFix, that is taking out CO2 emissions and putting them into very porous lava rock underground to kind of remove them from the atmosphere and keep them locked underground in rock. And I don't quite understand how it all works, but it's cool, and it's actually run by women.
But there is that kind of innovation going on there.
Yeah, that's a big focus, big environmental focus.
And back to what we said at the very beginning, you sometimes wear thrift store clothing because that's environmentally wise as well.
Yes, and again, we talked at the very beginning, we were talking a little bit about this idea, it's this blend of old and new, right? We do end up saying, why do we always ask the women what clothing they wear? But people do, and so if I know they do, I'm going to wear an Icelandic top when I'm traveling abroad, and if I wear secondhand clothing then to my husband's re-election event, and then say it's supporting the Red Cross, I think that's great as well.
Right. So you're using the platform wisely.
I try to.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you.